Alrighty then, testing like usual. Take this off. Hey there. Hopefully we are live. Just checking in on the stream here. It looks like we're good to go. Just turn the volume down there so I don't get the feedback. Hey everybody, how's it going today? This is the third live stream of these that we've done. This time I actually scheduled it in advance, which is progress. The last two were very much impromptu. This time I at least wanted to have something on the books Thursday night this time instead of Friday, mostly because tomorrow is Valentine's Day, and I don't know about you, but I will definitely be celebrating Valentine's Day, so I didn't want to be doing that tomorrow. So yeah, today will be a little bit of a shorter stream just because, hey Brian, how's it going, man? Good to see you here. Yeah, like I said, today is going to be a little bit of a shorter stream just because honestly I had a lot going on today and did not get as much done as I wanted to do and didn't have as much time to prep for this either, so it'll be shorter, but I wanted to at least jump in and still say hi. Hopefully still have a chance to answer questions for anybody that is tuning in and has any questions. As a refresher, this is kind of the format we've been going with here. Like I said, try and do like a community question, then I'll talk a little bit of what's new. I have a couple kind of interesting things to point out today. Another community question, and then just some like live Q&A, which last week went really good. We had a lot of nice questions last week and ended up going way longer than we thought. This week will not be going quite so long, but definitely excited to answer questions if there's any. So feel free to leave those in the chat right now or kind of wait till the end if you want to ask any questions. I can throw them up on the stream. And then we'll close with a question of the week here again, just to kind of get people chatting, hopefully have some conversation down in the comments below. And yeah, let's go ahead and jump in here. So if I go back to, we go back to the outline here. The first thing I wanted to talk a little bit today was just about how to migrate an app from Java to Kotlin. This is something that comes up a lot as people are sort of jumping into Kotlin, particularly if you're jumping into Kotlin in an existing team. And honestly, you could probably talk a lot about this. And as I was reading this question earlier, I was thinking that's probably a good video idea. So I might do something longer on this, but there's a few kind of main high-level points to kind of keep in mind when thinking about migrating an existing app from Java to Kotlin. And so there are a couple couple high-level ways you can think about going about this. So the first way, or one of the really common ways that gets thrown out for how to start migrating an app from Java to Kotlin, or how to introduce Kotlin into your app, is to start with tests. Now, the benefit to starting with tests is that that code is not being shipped out to users. So if there are worries or concerns on your team about the stability of the Kotlin code that you will be writing when starting out, or maybe there are concerns with interoperability, tests is a really great way to sort of get around those concerns. Hey, Marcos and Ethan, thank you both for joining in again. It's good to see you. So like I said, tests are a nice way because, like I said, they're not getting shipped out. So you can write the tests and you can review the tests, review the code that is written in Kotlin, start to play with some of the Kotlin language features within a testing environment that's a little bit more isolated from shipped code and from user-facing features. And this can be a nice kind of entryway into adding Kotlin into your project. It's also a good way to make sure that your build system is set up to handle Kotlin properly, that you can run your tests that are written in Kotlin. So again, it's kind of a nice way to kind of slide into testing out the integration of Kotlin within your existing code base. So kind of the other way to think about going about this, or one of the other ways, is to start using Kotlin for the development of new features. So instead of starting with tests, you might want to do new features because that's a better representation of what the language can actually do for you and how it might actually speed up your day-to-day development time. So if you go the new feature route, it also simplifies things because you're not trying to migrate existing code. So you're not destabilizing the app in any way. And okay, let's see, we got a question here from Ethan. Cool, I would definitely get to that, Ethan. Thank you for the question there. I'll throw that up later. So yeah, back in the world of for Kotlin new feature development, again, like if you're doing it with new features, it really gives you a chance to explore more of what the language can do. You can use things, you know, like your DSLs, your higher order functions, top level functions, properties, all that stuff. It gives you a better sense of really what the language is going to do for you potentially. It also gives you a better understanding of how Java and Kotlin interop might work in your code base. And it also, like I said, avoids the migration issues because you're just starting a greenfield feature. So, you know, if you want to play with Kotlin and introduce Kotlin into your code base, a nice way to do this is to find some brand new feature and implement it in Kotlin and then see how that looks, talk about it in code review, and explore that with your team. Now, if you're not going to start with tests and you're not going to start with new features, essentially you're left with kind of the migration path, which gets back to the heart of the original question. So how would you go about migrating your existing Java code over to Kotlin? And there's a few things I think, again, to keep in mind here. So you want to think about possibly migrating isolated features. These are features that maybe do not have a lot of interaction with other parts of your app or are non-critical. A good example of this would be maybe your about screen in your application. If something goes wrong with that, it's usually not the end of the world for your end user. It's something that probably doesn't change that often. It's not usually mission critical. So this could be a great place to start and start migrating existing code over to Kotlin. Now, when you start going about that migration, the simplest way to do that is to use the conversion tool from Java over to Kotlin, which you can do pretty easily. I think if you right-click on a Java file within IntelliJ or Android Studio, you could also use the lookup shortcut to look up just the phrase migrate Java to Kotlin. And that's a great way to get started. And you can get started as simple as one file, or you could start doing multiple files, multiple packages, or even up to a single module. So you have a lot of flexibility here in how you want to go about the actual migration. So like I said, maybe you have an about screen. You could think about migrating just the activity, for example, over to Kotlin and leave the existing, view model or repositories, everything else that's working with, those could stay in Java. And that could be just a small way to start going down that route of adding more and more Kotlin into your code base. So, I think the general advice I can give would be to start small. Don't try and rewrite everything in Kotlin. Don't try and migrate everything over to Kotlin. Start very small. Make sure it works with your build infrastructure. Make sure people on your team can start to understand and read Kotlin a bit so that you can get good code review on that. And then just kind of build that up slowly. And eventually, if you feel really comfortable with it and the people on your team are comfortable with the language, then you might think about going on a larger scale and start migrating maybe whole modules at a time and releasing those slowly and seeing how that works. This is the approach that I took at one company when we kind of made that migration. We did it slowly over a number of months and it worked really well for us. I don't think we really had too many issues related to that migration. So yeah, so start small, use the convert from Java to Kotlin tool, and think about what works best for your team. Start for tests, new features, or start migrating isolated existing features. So we jump over here into to the what's new section for today. And this is just a couple of things that have stuck out to me over the last couple of days, and I thought it would be interesting to pull up. So the first one here are just Android conferences. And the reason I kind of bring this up is because there are a ton of Android conferences out there these days, and I think it's hard to keep up with them. It's hard for me to keep up with them, and I'm very sort of aware of what's going on from trying to speak and attend a lot of them. So one resource that I wanted to just kind of point out to people was if you're looking for a really nice list of what Android conferences are out there, And specifically, if you're looking to speak at an Android conference, what call for papers are open. If you simply open up Google and you search for Android conference list, this first resource that pops up here, conference list-Android study group, this is pretty much my go-to resource here. In fact, even my wife looks at this sometimes because she knows that I'm going to look at this for potential travel opportunities throughout the year. And so you can kind of see here, they're just listed in order from, coming up most soon to further off in the year. But these have conferences from all over the world. They're not just Android conferences either. Some of these are more, general development conferences. But you can see some here like Chicago Roboto. I'll actually be speaking at that in April. But then you have, DroidCon in Italy, some of the dev fests from different GDG groups around the world, all the way up to things like OrDev in Sweden, which is a really awesome conference, Kotlin Conf coming up in Montreal. So if you're looking for, a larger Android event or a mobile development event, software development event in your country, this resource is a really good one to check out. And then obviously if you click on one of these, for example, it will take you over into the related info. A lot of these conferences have, Twitter accounts and all that you can help to follow individual ones, but this is a great launching point if you're looking for information about upcoming conferences to either attend or to speak at. Now, jumping back off of that, let's say that you want to speak at more conferences. Sometimes it's hard to know when these call for papers are coming available. So again, like I said, this first list, it does show if there's a call for papers open for a specific event. But beyond just kind of these core mobile ones, there's a couple of Twitter accounts I found to be really helpful for kind of tracking and discovering different call for papers. So the first one here is CFP Land, which is just CFP_land on their Twitter handle. And they pretty much just, tweet or retweet different call for papers out there related to a whole different array of conferences and domains and different types of development. So this is a nice resource, again, to just look at different conferences, discover new things, look for places that maybe you want to speak. And then another one, which is basically the same type of account. This is Tech Daily CFP. Again, that's just Tech Daily CFP, all one word. And they do the same thing. So you can kind of just scroll through here, discover some new events, maybe that are close to you, maybe that you want to check out, apply to speak at. And yeah, just a nice way to find some new ones. I found a number of conferences here in the US that I didn't even know existed that I think would be fun to attend or to speak at someday. So yeah, maybe check that out if that's something that you are interested in. Now the other one, or the other interesting thing here was the GitHub command line interface. This is something that I think was just announced today, actually. I saw it on Twitter this morning. And this is actually really interesting to me. So essentially, if you're not familiar, a CLI is just a command line tool that you can use. So similar to how you might use Git from the command line, you can now think about using a GitHub specifically from the command line. And so you can find more information here at cli.github.com. And you can kind of see if you watch this video here, which maybe I'll try and zoom in on this a bit. There we go. If you just kind of like watch through this, it highlights some of the features of this, which is actually pretty cool as you watch it. So you could do GH issue list, will show you all the issues for that repository or for your account. You could do GH PR create, so you actually create a new pull request directly from the terminal or the command line. You can check out pull requests, which is pretty cool, and probably something you're already kind of doing by checking out branches. And then you can look at the status of pull requests. And at first, I was honestly kind of skeptical of working with GitHub from the command line. And I think it was just kind of a gut reaction because I'm so used to going to the web interface. But I already use Git from the command line. That's kind of where I like to live with Git. So the idea of being able to also work with GitHub from the command line is pretty intriguing to me. And so this is something that I'm definitely going to explore soon. And I'll probably create a tutorial on this to just share how it works as well. If that's something that you're interested in seeing more about, leave a comment down below and just let me know what your questions would be about, how you might work with this, and that way I can answer them in that video when I create it. But if you want to learn more, like I said, there's cli.github.com. You can also find it on their GitHub page, which is just github.com/CLI, and just simply labeled the GitHub CLI. And you can come down and kind of, again, see more info about how this is used. It's available for pretty much all the operating systems. We got Mac OS, Windows, different flavors of Linux, so you should be covered. So again, this is a tool that a lot of people should be able to use, and I'm curious to see what type of adoption they get and how that kind of evolves, because GitHub as a platform really does a lot for us. And we're just sort of getting first-party mobile apps from them over this last year, and so I'm curious to see how much functionality they'll keep putting into the CLI tool as they also are expanding the platform and their other clients for GitHub as well. So that's just kind of two quick things taking a look at there. Yeah, let me know what you think of either of those. So now if we go back one more time here to our next question. Someone asked me earlier this week, what plugins do I install with my IDE? And I thought that was an interesting question just because I don't really think about that all that much. Oops, there we go. Yeah, not usually thinking about what plugins that I'm using, but there are some that I find very useful, and there's also some that I don't find useful and actually turn off. So if we open up my IntelliJ here, I'm gonna then open up the plugins here, and we can just kind of see. So I don't actually have a whole lot of plugins sort of downloaded and installed, but the ones I do I quite like. So JSON Viewer here, this is a simple plugin that actually, if we close this out here, you can see JSON Viewer is right here. And basically this will let you kind of write JSON and then format it for you. And then it'll tell you if you have errors. So here, if I just have one open curly brace and I click format, it shows invalid JSON text. If I close that, it will be valid, but it'll reformat it for me. And so I could actually then add a property here called, let's say, name, Nate. And if I format that, it'll kind of update that. So this is a nice plugin to just quickly sort of validate some JSON, especially if you're just needing a quick test string, much faster and easier than going out to a lot of the web tools I've seen there. And then if I go back to my preferences here one more time, the next plugin here that I'm using, Ktor. Basically the Ktor plugin for IntelliJ just lets you sort of get started creating Ktor applications in IntelliJ using Kotlin. If you're not familiar with Ktor, it's basically a framework for writing client and server code in Kotlin. I have a couple of videos on my channel related to writing back-end code with Ktor, kind of the basics of how to get started with it. So if you're interested in that, you can check it out. But yeah, basically that's all this plugin is doing. Another one is the Material Theme UI. This plugin is really fun. It kind of changes the appearance of the IDE. So some of the things here, like some of the icons are a little bit different, especially up here. There's more colors. It also gives you a nice way of customizing some of the colors and themes very easily. Let's see if I can figure out how to find that here. Yeah, I can't remember how to find that option off the top of my head. But let's... Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. Thankfully, if you're interested, I actually have a video on the YouTube channel as well that talks about specifically how to install this plugin and how to use it to customize the look and feel of your IDE. It's oddly one of the most popular videos on the channel. I think it's just because people like to customize their color schemes and their icons and all that stuff. So again, that one's pretty interesting. Doesn't do a lot functionally for you, but it makes the tools look better. And then another one here is Presentation Assistant. This one is nice for maybe pair programming or for giving any type of programming presentation. You can turn this on and basically will just show the key commands and shortcuts as you are working through your code and working in your IDE. So those are the few that I have installed. I'm really curious if you have some other go-to plugins. Let me know in the comments down below what plugins you find most interesting, or maybe things that we should all check out. There are, though, some other plugins I wanted to point out just as things that I've actually disabled. And one of the reasons you might want to disable plugins is just for the performance of your IDE. Less things kind of running in the background is theoretically more stable, more performant development experience. So as I just kind of scroll down, like I have some things disabled here, like the Ant build tool, just because I don't really use it, or Eclipse interoperability. Some other like source control things like Mercurial or Subversion, because I'm always using Git and GitHub. So if you go through this, and the same goes for Android Studio as well, if you scroll through and you see plugins that you're not using, you could experiment with turning those off. Sometimes you'll turn something off which will require you to maybe turn another thing off, or vice versa. But if you turn those off and your day-to-day work is not impacted, it is a nice way to potentially improve the performance of your IDE and hopefully lead to a nicer development experience in general, which I think we all like. And with that, we can jump over sort of to the live Q&A, which I don't think we're probably going to do a lot of tonight, just because I wanted to keep this short and it's already a little bit longer than I thought it might go. But we already did have at least one question here, which was from Ethan, which we'll throw this up there. The question is, what actually is the Android SDK? What does it include? Does it include Android Studio, Kotlin extensions? So that's a good question. So when we think of the Android SDK, in general, we're thinking, or at least I'm thinking of it as kind of the core framework for Android. So like today when we build Android, we have, Android Studio as this application that we're writing most of our code in. We have all the support libraries. We have things like the Kotlin extensions that you mentioned. We have third-party libraries. To me, as I think about this, all of that stuff kind of exists outside of the core SDK. I think the core SDK really consists of like the framework APIs, like the build tools. I'm trying to think of what else. Kind of just like the lower level frameworks. In fact, I wonder how difficult it would be here if I could just pull up the SDK location. Whoops. So if I go to my root directory here, I look for my hidden files, and then I think it's in, let's see, library, Android. There we go. So this is where I have installed my SDK on my machine. And so if I open this up, you can really see here like what is directly included in the SDK. So we do have build tools here. So those are build tools that you can install from like the dependency manager within Android Studio or IntelliJ. These are getting updated all the time. I've got CMake installed there, which I'm guessing is more for the NDK. If you're working with like the lower level native code, you can download documentation as part of this. Emulators essentially get included with this, some of the binaries that you use and system images. You have licenses, the platform tools, system images here for the various Android levels that you might want to test against. And then tools as well here. Like you can see ProGuard here, some of the different emulator stuff. This is also where like inside of this, you should have ADB somewhere. I don't remember where ADB is stored in here off the top of my head. Extras, no, those are some of the support libraries. But yeah, so basically it's a lot of the core stuff that makes Android work. Things like the support library, the Android Kotlin extensions, all of those things that kind of exist in separate repositories outside of AOSP, which is the Android open source project. Those things aren't really generally considered part of the core SDK. Like I said, they're the support libraries. It's the stuff in Jetpack. They're kind of extra added on. They're crucial. Like we couldn't do modern Android development without them today, but typically not considered part of like that core SDK. So that's a good question. There's probably parts of that I didn't quite answer super well off the top of my head, but that's kind of how you can generally think about it. Honestly, might be a good topic again for another video. Now I'm kind of curious, everything that includes just for my own sake even. All right, Brian, thank you for the comment here, man. Yes, the CFP Twitter handles are useful. I found like a whole list one night when I was just scrolling. Way too many that I could actually apply to, but they're interesting. And yeah, the GitHub CLI looks really cool. I'm excited to check that one out. From To You Review, another question here. What are the prerequisites of OOP in Kotlin to better understand it? So if I'm interpreting this question right, is asking like how much OOP or object-oriented programming do you need to know to really understand Kotlin properly? I mean, I think you need to know kind of the core fundamentals of OOP in that case. So essentially what is encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, and how to basically represent those within Kotlin, which isn't really any different for the most part than it is in Java. So if you're coming from Java, you're probably already fine. If you're coming really from any kind of strongly typed object-oriented programming language, most of the same principles are all going to apply. Some of the ways in which Kotlin adds a little complexity to it is one, you can have top-level properties and functions which actually exist outside of any class. So it's not all object-oriented programming with Kotlin. So that's one little wrinkle of the language. And then there's also things you can do with Kotlin that you can't do in older versions of Java, like have properties on an interface or have default implementations for an interface method. And there's things like the way in which classes are open and closed by default, which are different in Kotlin than in Java. But I think those are easy enough to pick up as you go. So if you're comfortable with the idea of modeling data with a class, how to abstract behavior, how to override that behavior in a child class, then you should be fine to really jump into Kotlin and start writing object-oriented code in Kotlin, and then to start building on that understanding and learning some of the subtle ways in which it's different from Java, for example. Cool. Ethan says, thank you for the answer. Yep, absolutely. Thank you for joining in, Ethan. I think you've been in like all of these now, which is awesome. And let's see, I think that is all the questions we have at the moment, which is totally fine. This is just about at like 30 minutes now, which feels like a long enough rate. So I'm going to go ahead and wind this down. But again, thank you to everybody for tuning in. Let me know how you like all these live stream. Oh, there we go. We got one more question. We'll do this last question and then we'll wind it down. So Martin asks, what tool are you using to manage views at your work? Data binding, view binding, Kotlin extensions, and why? That's a great question. So in my current project at work, I'm actually just going to throw that back up there one more time. So my current project at work, we are not using data binding, although I have used it in the past, and I really enjoyed using it in the past, but I'm not using it in my current project. And we haven't yet tried out any of the view binding stuff. I think that's really interesting, and I want to try it out. It looks kind of like the way to go in terms of just the best mix of performance, static typing, and all of that. And I think that we are maybe using some Kotlin synthetic extensions in some places. I also think that at least for a while we were using some Cotter knife, which is essentially a Kotlin implementation of a butter knife. It's a little bit different the way you use it, but the idea is the same. Essentially, you know, like a actually it's not an annotation so much as a delegate. So you can say something like, you know, text view, title text by was it find view by ID or something? I can't remember the API off the top of my head. But it's a nice way of sort of getting those bindings for you without having to explicitly write find view by ID. And so yeah, like it's kind of a mix of things. I do think view binding is a nice choice if you don't want the kind of the actual data binding features of being able to automatically update your code when you make a change to the model. And I can understand if you wouldn't, just because some people do get turned off by adding any type of logic to the XML, which is understandable because it's easy to abuse. Like I said, I found it pretty nice to use in some cases, but these days I don't think I would go with it. I would go with probably view binding. And then, you know, I generally these days am exposing like a single view state to my UI layer from the view model layer. And so it becomes pretty easy to just bind that data there. So I don't find the benefit from view binding all that useful anymore. But I think it was pretty good at its purpose there. And then the Kotlin synthetics, they're nice. They do sort of get the job done pretty easily, but I've heard some stories of people running into issues with those and like multi-module projects or with like build tooling, and they've always felt a little bit too abstract. They're very black box. I never knew quite what was happening, so I've stayed away from those for the most part. Although I know a lot of people have used them successfully without issue, and like I said, I think we have some in our project. So this is one of those things that I don't think there's necessarily like a best way of going about it. I think it depends on your use case, what feels right for you. I think there were some Google I/O talks about view binding that showed the comparison and performance and whatnot. So those would be a good resource to learn more about that aspect of it. All right. Gang Adar. Ooh, I'm sorry, I'm sure I butchered your name, but thank you very much for turning in. Gangadar. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm bad with names, but thank you very much for tuning in again. And again, yeah, thank you to everybody. I think the only last thing we have here is just a question of the week here. And this is something that I was thinking about recently because last week I hosted a meetup. This week I've been thinking about some upcoming conferences. And so I just posed this question to you all. Do you think that meetups and conferences are a valuable use of your time, money, and energy? You know, if you have a thought on this, I'd love to hear it and think about how you evaluate whether they're worthwhile or not, what are the benefits you get out of them. So yeah, if you want to leave a comment down below, I'd love that. I'd love to kind of chat about that. For me, I think they're really useful, but I think they have diminishing returns. I find that after I've gone to like a couple events close together, I just start to get full of information and it's hard to like want to get as excited. I don't feel like I get as much out of them. So I think doing them sparingly and kind of spreading them out is really beneficial, both from a chance to learn and from a chance to meet people and to network. So if you have thoughts on that, let me know. And with that, I will go ahead and kind of wind this down. Again, thank you everybody for tuning in. Brian, thank you so much for tuning in. It's awesome to see you. Ethan, Martin from 2U Review, Gengadar, Noor. Thank you everybody. And okay, actually I just saw Noor's question, and because it's related to what we just sort of talked about, I will jump in with this one time. So one last question here, last time for reals. Noor asks, I am using Java for Android development now. Whoop, throw it back up. Should I switch to Kotlin or should I be proficient in Java first? I don't really think there is a right or a wrong way here. I think the biggest question for me would be, are you already proficient in building Android apps? So if you're using Java, you're comfortable with Java, and you're comfortable building an app from start to finish, doesn't have to be a super complex app, but the basics, if you can build a simple app, then I think, jumping over and learning Kotlin is awesome. If you're kind of learning Android development and Java at the same time, I wouldn't suggest jumping over to Kotlin, just because I think it's more important to be able to build an app than it is to be able to build an app with Kotlin. At the end of the day, your users don't know what language it is. So the most employable part of that skill set is being able to build an app and being able to understand the ins and outs of how to do that. And the specific tools that you use, I think, are less important. So, if you were jumping in right away and learning Kotlin and Android at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily suggest going back and learning Java first. I would suggest learning Kotlin, learning how to build an app with Kotlin, then learning more about Java. And the same goes in reverse. So if you're already comfortable with Java, or you're already starting to learn Java, once you become proficient and understand how to build a simple app, then go ahead and add Kotlin onto that. And it won't take a very long time to sort of add that skill set, just because Kotlin is very easy to pick up and to start writing. So with that, that will go ahead and be, for sure, the last question. One last time, thank you for checking it out. If you tuned in, if you liked the video, hit the like button, because it really does help make YouTube happy and help the channel. If you want to leave a comment with any questions for maybe next week's video, or if you want to let me know what you think about conferences and meetups and if they're useful, please leave a comment down below. And I will catch you all in the next video. Have a great night, have a great week, and I'll talk to you later. So until next time, devs.